Welcome to the Sleep Haunt. Tonight, the long road winds through silence and shadow, carrying 7 true, disturbing trucker horror stories. Tales from deserted highways, flickering gas stations, and endless miles where the dark feels close enough to breathe. These stories move slow and quiet, but they linger long after the last light fades behind you. Stay with me until the final mile, where each story connects to the next, and the last echo fades into stillness. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what waits beyond the road. Share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and like our video. Your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the road. Story number 1. Long desert nights have a way of thinning the world until it feels like there is only a ribbon of asphalt and whatever rides it. Out on a southwestern interstate, a refrigerated trailer hummed its steady note, while a driver named Garrett rolled his rig through an hour that belonged to few others. He had left a small distribution yard with a sealed load, a clean bill of lading, and a promise to a produce buyer that he would slide under a dock door before lunch. The reefer's soft vibration was a lullaby of reliability. The air was so dry that the stars seemed close enough to nudge. Mile markers flashed in his periphery, quick green flickers. 250. 1, 250, 240, 9. The ELD on the dash showed his drive time in careful blocks. The radio was a whisper of distant voices too far to make out. The road was good, empty, and straight, except for a gentle curve that leaned left as the highway slid past a low ridge of rock and ocotillo. When a sign came up on the right, it was the kind that did not look like it belonged in the desert at all. A crisp, clean billboard with a smiling coffee mug and a line that read, Sagebrush Overlook Vincate or Café and Fuel Exit 246. The photograph on it was colder than coffee ever is out here. The cup looked like frost. Garrett made a note without thinking. He had enough fuel to push through the night, but a top-off was never a bad idea. He let the thought pass. The dash clock ticked toward a time that only the most stubborn diners keep. Static jumped to life on Channel 19. A voice both close and far. Southbound. How's it looking at 247? Another voice answered, flat and calm. Clear lanes. Watch for maintenance west of the ridge. The desert accepted the sound and made it thin. He didn't see a maintenance crew. He didn't see anything except 2 lanes, a line of reflectors, and a sky that could swallow a person's sense of scale. The left lean came again gentle, predictable, as if the highway were practicing an old routine. He eased on without thinking much of it. The green marker flashed, 247. The exit sign rose. Sagebrush. Overlook 24. Our Cafe and Fuel Exit 246. He frowned. It was the same sign, the same photograph, the same slight scratch on the lower corner that looked like someone had brushed it with a ladder. The first sign wasn't miles back. The first sign had only just been there. He reached for the radio and let it sit. He told himself the company that owned the cafe liked to advertise twice. He took the exit. The ramp dipped away from the interstate, and the quiet got thicker. Sodium lights on tall poles cast cones of pale gold on empty concrete. The cafe squatted low, with its glass dark but open sign glowing in red. One of the canopy lights over the fuel island flickered in a slow, steady rhythm that matched the blinker of his turn signal. A coyote crossed the far end of the lot without sound, its shadow sliding over painted arrows. He pulled up, shut down just enough to step out, and felt air so still that even his breath seemed to fall and lay flat. Inside, the cafe held the smell of coffee that had been fresh earlier in some other hour. The jukebox in the corner didn't work, but lights along its edges still ran their slow circuit. A clerk stood behind the counter with a magazine, eyes moving without lifting. She looked like she had learned how to be unbothered and enjoyed the practice. Fuel or food? She asked. Coffee, he said, because the habit of having something hot to hold was older than any weariness. She pointed to the dispenser. He filled a cup that steamed, paid, and stepped back outside into the soft murmur of the reefer. On the ramp back to the interstate, something tugged at him, not a thought, not even a feeling, just a small weight in the neck that people get when they've left a light on or a door ajar. As his rig climbed, the radio breathed another question from the same voice. Southbound. How's it looking at 247? The answer was the same. Clear lanes. Watch for maintenance west of the ridge. He merged. He passed green numbers counting down. The left lean came again. It was easy to tell himself that the desert repeats, because it is big and built to do so. He glanced at the dash clock and let the road carry him. At marker 247, the clean billboard rose from the dark a second time. Sagebrush. Overlook 24-hour cafe and fuel exit 246. The scratch on the lower corner had the same small arc. The cup in the photograph had the same shine across its rim. He let his speed fall a touch, not so much that it would be noticed from behind, but enough to tell himself that he had seen what he had seen. His mirrors held a pinned slice of road behind him, a gray ribbon with no one on it. Then, as if the night had been waiting to decide, a single headlight appeared low and off-center, the way a service truck looks when one lamp is out and the other is doing the work of two. It stayed there, not closing, not dropping back, just a dot of white that did not blink. Radio again. Southbound. How's it looking at 247? For a while, the world was only three sounds. Tires, reefer, and a voice that could have been playing from a recording left to loop. The weight at his neck grew a shade heavier. He reached for his ELD, not to touch it, just to see if the time was behaving. It was. The blocks were clean, the minutes honest. He took the exit again. He told himself he wanted to see whether the cafe looked the same twice. The lights in the lot flickered in the same rhythm. The same coyote crossed the far end and did not turn its head. Inside, the same clerk stood with the same magazine. Only this time, the pages lay on the exact same spread, as if they had never turned. "Coffee?" she asked, but the word landed like she didn't expect an answer, as if it had to be said. He didn't go inside. He stood in the doorway just long enough to hear the clock on the wall tick 3 times. When he walked back to his rig, his own footprints from 5 minutes before were not on the dust of the lot. In his stainless tank reflection, that single headlight made a narrow comet. On the ramp, he kept the speed low and looked for anything he had missed. The radio asked its question. The answer came. Tone unchanged. The left lean embraced him once more. It was not possible to be this close to his own tire tracks on a highway that long, but the feeling of being near something he had already done was strong enough to taste. He didn't take the exit. He let the sign pass, and when he did, the one-eyed lamp behind him flicked a fraction of brightness brighter and then settled back, as if disappointed. He breathed once, deep and slow, and chose not to push the radio button, not to put words into the exchange. He counted the reflectors that divided the lanes, a childish thing done by a grown man alone, and found that the act steadied the world. 40 reflectors. 50. 100. The count became a second road he could travel in his head. Another marker. 247. Another billboard. The cup with frost, light curling off its rim. He felt a laugh press up under the weariness, and did not let it out. He reached for a different thought. There had been a narrow service road along the fence line when he took the exit the first time. A strip of old asphalt that paralleled the interstate for ranch trucks and utility crews. He looked for it now, and when he saw the gap in the fence at a maintenance cut, he signaled and slipped through with the unhurried confidence of someone doing what he was supposed to do. Back on the service strip, the highway became a thing he could watch, rather than a thing that held him. The one-eyed light stayed on the big road, pacing him. Out, here, the stars felt closer, lower, like a lid barely lifted. He passed a line of saltbush that looked like it had not moved in 100 years. He passed a broken gate whose chain ended in a loop that had made its own circle in the dust. The service road was rough. It forced him to slow. That slowing did something to the radio. The question faded and came back not on channel 19, but in the old squeal of a weather band. Words melted and then gathered again, a voice he recognized now not as a person but as a recorded loop, the kind that plays for civil messages and emergency alerts. He listened to it like he might listen to a rattle in the engine, not for content, but for pattern. The pattern was too perfect. No human stutters, no small breaths between phrases. The desert had decided to play a message that was as clean as a machine can make it, and to feed it in through a speaker built for static. When the service road curved away and wanted to carry him into a wash, he cut back up to the interstate at the next gap. The one-eyed light was gone. The road behind him was a straight line fading into nothing. He eased into the right lane and kept the speed wide but respectful. And because the night was keen to test him, the sign rose one more time. Sagebrush Overlook, 24-hour cafe, and fuel exit 246. He took a breath and met it like he would meet a wind gust. With hands calm on the wheel, eyes forward, attention on the inches of tire that mattered. He did not look at the picture this time, not even with the side of his eye. The left lean came and went. The radio did not speak. He drove until the green numbers turned to 246, 245, 244, and the air in the cab felt thin the way it does just before dawn. At the first hint of sunrise, when the black-backed blue of the sky softened and the rock of the ridge lost its sharpness, he rolled into a way station that had been dark for weeks. Tonight, the sign said open. Orange cones made a lane. He pulled onto the scale, air brakes breathing out. The officer in the booth looked like he had seen every tired face that ever stepped to his window. He glanced at the screen and then at the rig. "How's the road over the ridge?" he asked, casual in the way people are when they've already heard the answer. "Quiet," Garrett said. His voice sounded like it had come from someone else's mouth. "Funny," the officer said, marking something. "Been closed from midnight to 4 for resurfacing all month. Guess they finished early tonight." Garrett waited. He did not argue. He accepted a weight slip that didn't need to exist, a form that felt like it had been printed for a different day. When he pulled off the scale, he caught the corner of the officer's mouth tilt, not a smile and not a frown, just a small movement a face makes when it knows something is missing from a pattern and can't place it. He parked in the back lot where trucks sleep and let the engine idle down. He sat in the hush that comes only when a big machine yields its sound back to the world. In the cup holder, the coffee from the cafe was still warm. On the paper sleeve, someone had written 3 words in tidy, everyday handwriting: "Don't look back." He turned the sleeve in his hand and found no name, no doodle, just the advice, simple as a road sign. He hadn't noticed it before, and he didn't know if it had been written for him. But he knew he had followed it without meaning to, and that was enough comfort for one morning. When he made his delivery later, a warehouse worker mentioned the new cafe at the Overlook. "Finally open again after years," she said. "They took down the old sign last winter." He nodded. He did not tell her that the sign on the highway still knew all the words to a promise it should no longer make. Out in the desert, where long-haul drivers keep company with stars and static, it said that some exits read the minds of the men and women approaching and offer exactly what is needed to slow them down. It is also said that if a sign appears twice in the same song of tires and wind, the safe way through is to count something small, keep the line straight, and let whatever wants a glance from the mirror get nothing at all. Story number 2. Night winds move differently over flat country. They don't climb and tumble the way they do in hills. They slip low and steady in a single direction, like a wide river made of air. Across those northern fields where winter hangs on even when the calendar argues, a flatbed rolled east with steel coiled tight and strapped down in a pattern learned and relearned on shop floors and loading docks. The truck's running lights made a small island of color in a world that was mostly gray-blue and frost-white. A grain elevator stood far off like a lighthouse. A radio tower pulsed red in a measured rhythm that felt like it had its own breath. The driver was a woman named Mara, and her habit was to let the CB hum low, not off, not loud, just a faint company of other voices, in case a mile marker hid black ice or a stray tire tread made a decision at the wrong time. She didn't talk much on it, not unless there was something to say. The reefer song wasn't her world. Her freight rode open, tightly coiled steel with a cold that wandered down into the chassis. Every so often the load gave off a small sound, as one turn of the coil settled the way a person shifts on a chair to be sure weight is where it belongs. She had crossed a line where fields turn to cattails and small lakes, the kind that freeze shallow and thaw late. A long, low bridge carried the highway over a wide wetland where fog rose in curtains. Her mind was occupied with simple, necessary things: next rest window, fuel stop, what the wind was doing when the road cut open to the left. Her strap tension gauge said everything was solid. The dash clock kept ordinary time. The route planner on the tablet glowed with a good line. Eastbound at 312, you're running heavy with your strap singing. Ease it back and take a look. The voice came on channel 19 without preface or urgency. A tone that belonged to long nights and the gentle authority of someone who had been out there enough to let words come slow. It was not a bark, not a warning that demanded anything. It felt like a hand in the air, a small wave from someone parked on the shoulder up ahead. Mara looked at the channel light, and then at the mirrors. No one was where the voice would be. She put her foot a fraction lighter on the throttle and scanned the road ahead. 312 was the green number she had just passed a moment before, a sign that had flicked by in the periphery. Her strap wasn't singing. It couldn't be. She had checked it with her own hands when she left the shipper. Then she heard it. It wasn't loud. It was not even a sound, so much as a sensation in the frame, a thin vibration that worked its way through the deck and into her seat. The way a barely plucked guitar string lifts the air in a quiet room. She looked to the right and saw one strap quiver just enough that the fabric blurred for an instant at the edge of the headlight's reach. It was the third in the pattern over the coil, not the one that worries most drivers, but not a small one either. She signaled and let the rig drift into a wide gravel turnout where snowplows turn when the season is thick. The wind was not much, just enough to make a fine mist of crystals in the beam when she stepped out. The night had that deep quiet a person can feel in winter fields, the kind that comes from distance and the way snow absorbs the extra parts of sound. With gloves on, she eased the tension off the third strap, checked the ratchet for ice, and ran the length to find a place where the edge had taken a hard kiss from something rough, maybe a short burr on the coil's dunnage, maybe a past scuff from someone else's mistake still telling its story. It wasn't cut through. It was a whisper of a weakness no one would see if they weren't down there with a light. She swapped it for her spare and double-checked the chain binders as long as she was at it. The load sighed, settled half a hair, and went quiet again. Back in the cab, the radio did not repeat itself. She pressed the talk button and asked for a location. "What's your 20?" Silence held for a beat so long she could hear the heater's blend door change position. Then, "Keep it to the right through the cut. Left lane slick in the shadow. There is a section east of the marsh where the highway was carved through a low ridge a long time ago. They call it the cut. Daytime, it's unremarkable. Nighttime, it catches wind that slides down off the plateau and chills the bare rock until it shines hard under any frost that finds it. Most drivers learn to give it respect. Mara had been through it in rain, in snow, and in that narrow band of temperature when meltwater looks wet but lays itself like glass. She went right when the rock rose on both sides and let the left lane sit, untouched. The center line's beads of paint glinted like fish scales on a river. She passed the place where the cut lets go and opens, and only then did she notice that a long scuff in the left lane went as far as her eyes could follow. Something had skated there recently, long and straight, then wobbled once and corrected. She breathed and watched the mirrors. The voice did not say its name. He did not have to. The old-timers had a handful of handles that people still used on the air like talismans. Somewhere back when she was new, a man with a steady tone had called himself Beacon and sat on 19 during storms to tell people about black ice in the hill shadow, fog that was more than fog over a creek bed, or a deer run that crossed at mile 309 like it had a calendar. He never told anyone what to do. He phrased everything like a suggestion. She had not heard him in years. She had heard he was gone, stopped on the shoulder to help with a flare, and never took the wheel again. Sometimes, in winter, the handle still came back. People said it was a nephew, a friend, someone carrying on. People said different things. 3 miles past the cut, the road arced over a broad river on a bridge that was painted the color of faded summer. The girders rose like ribs and threw shadows on the deck. She set her eyes on the right seam of the lane the way good driving schools teach, not on the far-off nothing. Fog lifted off the water and turned headlights into halos. She did what she always did. She made her attention narrow and let the rest of the world be background. "Clear through the span," the voice said as if to the air. "If you lose your markers, count the posts. They're 50 paces apart on the right." She had never paced the distance between reflectors. Not many do. Someone had. Someone had counted with boots on gravel for the practical comfort of knowing space in a fog where distance folds on itself. She found one post in the beam, a slender stick with its small square reflector shining like a soft eye, and found the next and the next. When the fog thickened to a white that was more cloud than ground mist at the center of the river, she let the posts be the rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Hold your lane. 4, 5, 6. Keep the touch light. By the time the bridge let them go and the land rose again into the farmland beyond, the fog had thinned as if a hand had smoothed it. The night went back to a kind of ordinary that winter sometimes allows after it's shown its edge. She had planned to stop at a place called Glacier Run Travel Center for a cup and a bathroom break. It had a big parking lot and a row of old photographs of snowplows around the time men wore wool and trucks wore chains like jewelry. When she pulled in, the lot was as near to empty as a 24-hour place gets. A single four-wheeler slept sideways across two spots, as if it had lost the idea of straight lines. The clerk behind the counter wore a reflective vest like a badge and watched weather radar on a tablet. A screen above the coffee urns showed a highway camera of the cut, with wind-whipping powder from the walls in little ghosts. "You catch the salt trucks?" the clerk asked, making conversation in the way night clerks do, not demanding, not nosy. "Didn't see them," Mara said. "State pushed them east. They're spraying brine at 3:05 and down to the river. Be nice on your way back through later." The clerk poured her a fresh cup like it was the last act of a play. Mara looked up at a corkboard where local notices tucked themselves next to clean bathrooms and the promise of soup. A photograph hung there under a thumbtack. A group of drivers in winter hats clustered around a CB mounted on a counter. The caption read, "Club Night 97. Someone had written Beacon under one of the faces, in ink that had faded to brown. Beside it, a small plaque said, "In memory of Al Beacon, H., who kept the air kind in bad weather." The clerk followed her glance. "Old-timers used to hold court here," she said softly. "One of them would sit in that corner with boots on the rail and talk folks through the worst of it. Loved to say he was just a lamp on a rocky shore. Not every coincidence is a message. Not every echo is a person returning." Mara warmed her hands on the cup and told herself she just had a clear pattern of thought that had led to good decisions. Check the strap, take the right lane, count the posts. But when she stepped back out into the night, the radio picked up a little bit of somewhere that was not in the room with her. "Don't take the overlook," the voice said. "Closed for the season. The ramps buckled." She hadn't planned to. The overlook was a scenic loop, where in summer people pulled over to take pictures of a wetland, lit green and gold. Winter heaves and swells in odd places. She made a note without challenging the suggestion. Habit was not arguing. She let the coffee sit in a place where it wouldn't tip and rolled back onto the highway while the radio tower's red light blinked in the distance like a pulse. East of Glacier Run, the land opens more. Fields watch each other across long distances, and a farmhouse finds itself with no neighbors close. A train's horn drifted from somewhere south, 3 notes pulled long, then 2. The highway rose to cross it at a place where steel rails flashed once and were gone. Beyond that, the air changed. Fog doesn't announce itself with a line, but sometimes it draws one. 1 second the stars are present, the next everything is a soft gray, the color of feathers. Mara dropped her speed the way a person lowers their voice when they walk into a quiet room. The white thickened. The world narrowed to a small circle in front of her, and the rumble strip's soft brrr on the right was a comfort. She lost the lines, and then gathered them again. The beam made a wall, and then, one by one, amber lights floated at the edge. Hazard triangles, set with care. There was a pickup on the shoulder, deep in the fog. Nobody visible. She eased left just enough to give space, and stayed with her lane as if it were a thread she was unwilling to drop. "Count your posts, driver," the voice said in a tone that had the smile of someone remembering their own miles. "Right side. Let the world be small and honest." She did. 1, 2, 3. In her mirror, nothing reached for her. The world behind was simply gone in the wash of light. She thought, without meaning for it to comfort, of a time years ago when she had stopped on a hill with a man who taught her about strap patterns and what frost looks like on bare rock under the stars. He had said, "Don't argue with ice. It's stubborn and it doesn't mind if it's alone." Even memory can be useful equipment. The fog thinned as quickly as it had thickened. Flat land does that. The road was itself again, with lane lines and distance. Far off, blinking synchronized, a stand of wind turbines put on their slow red show, moving unseen blades in the dark. She set the cruise a whisper below her, usual to account for what might still be hidden, and let the miles turn. In the east, the first idea of morning laid a light behind the clouds that was not yet a color. On the other side of the turbines lay a wide interchange where the highway split. One route dove toward a riverside town. The other held its line across fields. An arrow board at the gore point flashed left, right, left, suggesting a lane closure. No cones, no signs, no crew. The message board above the lanes was dark, patchy snow, clinging to its corners like fur. Arrow board stuck, the voice noted. Generator keeps a blink even when there's nothing on the road. Stay right where the pavement's newer. He didn't say what could happen otherwise. He didn't need to. Mara had seen what a puzzled thought looks like in headlights. A driver shifting lanes without conviction because a machine told them to. She held to the right, eyes scanning for anything that did not belong. She rolled past the arrow with space and watched it flicker in her mirror until the fog swallowed it. Her ELD chirped a reminder that her clock would want a break soon. She planned one at a rest area with sheltered picnic tables and long bathrooms that echoed. As she approached, a gate swung halfway across the ramp with a sign, "Closed for winter maintenance." The barricade had snow on it that hadn't fallen this hour. She felt the first edge of fatigue that comes when plans shift in small ways on a cold night. 2 more miles, said the voice she had not asked for but had not shut out. There's a gravel pad by the old scales. Pull in there. It's level. Old scale sites are scattered along miles like forgotten stories. There's square patches of concrete where a roof used to stand, weeds in the seams, a gray electrical cabinet bolted shut with an official seal. She'd passed this one 100 times. She had never stopped. When she reached it, the pad looked clean, wind had swept it bare, and the space felt wide enough to breathe. She eased in, checked her angle, and let the brakes set. The night around her went so quiet that the small pings of warm metal cooling ticked like a metronome. In the headlight wash of the empty highway, movement flickered an instant, nothing like shadows deciding to remind each other that they exist. She didn't place it until a minute later, when a line of deer crossed the road in a patient single file, heads lowered, steam rising from their mouths. 6, then 7, then one that stopped, looked into the dark where her engine was, and went on. If she had been on the road in that moment, she would have been exactly there. The thought didn't frighten so much as settle her deeper into the seat with respect. Static pattered on the CB once like rain against a window far away. Then, soft as a friend closing a door without waking the rest of the house, "Straps are good now. You did right." She reached for the mic and pressed the talk button without thinking about what she could possibly say. "Thanks? Who are you tonight?" It came out plain. "Appreciate you," no voice answered. The radio's squelch hissed and then calmed like a breath drawn and released. A trooper's cruiser pulled in 20 minutes later, slow, tires whispering on gravel. He didn't put his lights on. He rolled a window down, and a little wave made in the air was friendly. "Smart spot," he said, voice carrying in the cold. They shut the rest area gate because the ramp buckled last week. Frost heave under the asphalt. We had 2 rigs stuck there needing a tug just to get out. "You comfortable here?" "All good," she said. "Watch the cut on your way back. Little sheen under the rock. State's brining, but the temperature's playing games." He gave a nod and rolled away, the red tower lights farther off marking his slow progress back onto the road. She took a short nap in that way drivers do, not deep, not long, just enough to smooth the edge off the moment. When she woke, her window framed a sky that was no longer night, but not yet day. The horizon had a pale seam. She checked the coil, ran her hands along the straps, and felt the small roughness in the replaced one that had threatened to grow. The new strap lay smooth. The chain's hooks were seated like they belonged, and had always belonged. Curious as simple honesty, she looked at the CB when she climbed back up. The channel was where she had left it. No mysterious switch, no phantom glowing indicator. A smudge on the mic from her glove, nothing to mark that anyone had used it but her. The miles east to her delivery almost forgot to be miles. Daylight found them. The world rearranged itself in the way it does when light lays itself on familiar shapes. The diner near the dock had a different crowd during daylight, local workers with orange vests, 2 men in utility jackets making plans over toast. Behind the register, A dusty map on the wall traced the same highway she'd just run. A state radio site was marked with a small star, not an inch from where she'd stopped. "Map's old," said the woman working the counter when Mara's eyes lingered. "Used to be a guy would park up on that knoll when the weather turned and keep everybody's nerves steady. My uncle swore he'd helped him avoid a jackknife in '96 by telling him where not to use the brake. I don't know about all that. I do know the radio up there is still hot. They use it for emergency messages when the tower's ice." Mara didn't tell her anything about voices or straps. She didn't need to. Some stories in road country don't ask for belief. They stand there politely and let people decide what to do with them. At the dock, a loader sized up her binders the way a person considers a friend's new suit. "You tie down like you teach it," he said. "Don't see that every day." "Somebody taught me right," she said. When all was said and fastened and her paperwork handed back, she climbed into the cab and found a small square of paper caught between the dash and the CB bracket, likely shaken loose by the night's miles. It was the corner of an old load checklist, edges feathered by time. On it, in tidy handwriting, someone had written a short note with a pen that had skipped once. "Keep to the right of the seam in the cut." It didn't have a name on it. It didn't have to. Maybe it had been hers all along. Forgotten. Pressed in a manual from years ago. A reminder that drifted forward from a drawer of old papers. Maybe somebody before her left it behind. Maybe it arrived the way some advice arrives when the roads are cold. Not from a person you can argue with, but from the sum of everyone who ever wanted people to get home. People still say that when fog pushes up from the river and lays down across the bridge, a voice with a calm heart will speak, as if it sits in the corner of the cab, light on, boots up, making little weather reports in a language without orders. They say he liked to consider himself a lighthouse, which is a proud thing and a humble one, because lighthouses don't steer ships and don't move. They shine and let others choose. And in places where the air is made of small crystals and the plants by the fence line wear frost like lace, they say a good way through is to let the world be small, to count what can be counted posts, breaths, seconds, and to trust that some of the miles will be easier because someone, somewhere, once stood on a knoll in a coat, with his hands in his pockets, and decided to spend his night keeping watch over names he did not know. Story number 3. On some stretches of highway, the night doesn't sit still. It seems to breathe. Along the long bridge that crosses the Atchafalaya Basin, the dark is a living thing made of water and cypress. The road floats above it on concrete piers that look like bones when the moon is up. On either side, there is nothing close enough to touch only black water, gray trunks, and the low chorus of frogs and insects speaking to each other in their patient language. Wind slides under the deck and hums like a string plucked by a careful hand. It's a place where headlights feel like a small, brave idea. A driver named Lionel eased his rig onto that ribbon with a load of paper goods stacked in a clean, bright wall inside the trailer. He ran nights by preference. The air was kinder to the engine, and the world, reduced to what a beam could hold, was easier to understand. He had topped off in Lafayette and taken a minute in the lot to check his tires, then rolled east until the flat trees rose up, and the bridge began without any real ceremony, shoulders narrowing, signs asking firmly for no stopping, no idling, no excuses. The dash glowed with a familiar cluster of lights. Coolant fine, oil pressure solid, air tanks in the green. The ELD gave him a wide stretch to breathe. His coffee was just right, not hot enough to burn, not cool enough to forget. There's a lot of talk on the radio about this bridge. People give it nicknames, trade stories about speed traps and sudden fog. Everyone knows someone who had a close moment near Whiskey Bay. Tonight, the air was clear enough to feel honest. A sliver of moon hid behind thin cloud. The beams of his lamps made a bright tunnel without finding a wall. He could see the shallow cages mounted at intervals on the shoulder, the old emergency phone bays, square and yellow years ago, now faded the color of dried straw. He'd heard most of those phones were gone, outpaced by cell coverage and time. The boxes remained like forgotten birdhouses, doors shut, hinges crusted with salt air and moss. He'd passed under a sign that said no services. Next 18 miles and felt the weight of that number in the space behind his sternum, the way all drivers do. A simple math problem solved by attention. The first ring was so clear he thought for an instant that it had come from his own dash. It was a bell tone, not the trill of a mobile call. A single, solid note of metal on metal, the kind of ring that used to live on kitchen walls and in small offices with blinds and fans. He looked to the shoulder by reflex and saw one of the yellow boxes sitting square and closed. He glanced at the phone on the dash out of habit. Quiet. Radio quiet. Nothing on the tablet but map and miles. He told himself he had heard a buoy somewhere out on the water, or a train's crossing bell carried by wind. He told himself things drivers tell themselves when they have no intention of stopping. A comforting sentence that keeps attention where it belongs. The rig took a gentle rise, the bridge sound changed a shade, and ahead a maintenance turnout widened the concrete for the length of a box truck. On its far edge, something glinted. He kept his line without drift, and saw it for what it was, a broken wooden pallet in the right lane, a scatter of gray boards like a small picket fence knocked down. It was far enough under the beam to be a problem only if a person weren't ready. He signaled left, gave the debris a clean pass, and slid back over. In the corner of his ear, he thought he heard a voice, not in the cab, not in the air exactly, but threaded through the low hum like a station that doesn't quite want to come in. He didn't catch words. He caught the shape of them. Calm, practical, the way a person sounds when they help, because that's what they do when roads demand it. A mile marker flicked by. 126. He hadn't been counting, but his mind took hold of the number and put it in a place where it could check back later. He settled his shoulders, eased a touch of pressure off the wheel, and let the night be big without letting it be empty. The ring came again 2 minutes later, exactly as before. A single bell tone that did not feel like it could possibly have traveled across water, through glass, into a cab moving at highway speed. He kept his eyes tied to the right seam of the lane like an anchor. The yellow box ahead on the shoulder had its door open by an inch, dark inside as a pocket. His dash lit up with an incoming call. It did not say a number. It did not say unknown. It said, absurdly, public telephone WB 127. Lionel exhaled. He did not break. He did what drivers do when the unusual appears in the same sentence as traffic laws and safety. He let his rig be steady. He tapped the talk button on his wheel to link to his hands-free. "This is the operator," a man's voice said, even and crisp, like someone trained to speak across a wire when a room is full of noise. "If you are eastbound on the span and can hear me, keep left for 100 yards. Debris in the right lane. Say if you can hear." Lionel considered all the ways this could be a bad idea. He considered prank and ghost story and failing electronics. He considered the pallet he had just eased around. "Copy," he said to nobody in particular and everybody at once. "Left clear." His voice sounded calm, because calm was what it needed to be. The line clicked, as if the man had nodded a long way away. He saw the shape then. Another slat from the same broken pallet bumped against the center line. He could have straddled it, and likely been fine. He didn't. He gave it space, rolled clean, and said thanks out loud without pushing a button to send the word anywhere. The bell in his ear didn't ring. The squares of dark water under the deck kept their counsel. He changed the radio to 19 and let the speaker sit quiet, just enough volume to catch anything useful. For a dozen heartbeats, the bridge felt like a hallway with doors every few seconds. He watched, careful and easy. His phone screen stayed dark. His heartbeat came back down to the speed of an engine at highway idle. At marker 127, his phone lit again. Public telephone WB 127. He understood then that WB might be Whiskey Bay, might be a code for this stretch, might be a joke if you were sitting still and looking for ways to make someone else's night more interesting. He told himself to ignore it. He did for one ring. It rang again, a second time. Identical on the dash, and across the water in the air bell in the box. Bell in the speaker. A perfect, doubled sound that pinned his attention like a small nail. He answered. "Operator," the voice said. A slight rush of warmer sound around that single word, a room behind the speaker with no echo. "If you're hearing me, don't stop on the shoulder. Troopers are blocking a lane ahead to remove obstacles. You'll see lights. Pass without lane change and reduce to 45. Confirm if you can see the first strobe." "I see no lights yet," Lionel said. The words sounded formal, like he was in a tower speaking to a cockpit. He did not know why he matched the tone. and did not try to change it. "Stand by at reduced speed," the operator said. "If you can, do not answer twice." The last sentence landed with the gravity of a thing said 1,000 times before. Then the line went dead. No click. No goodbye. No static. The call simply wasn't there. When lights came into view, they were what he expected, and exactly not what he expected. Two sets of flashers, both in the ramp space of a turnout, directed toward the shoulder like polite, contained storms. No cruiser in the lane. No cones. A state truck's bar lit like a late Christmas tree. A worker in a reflective jacket kneeling by the old box on the wall. The jacket's stripes flashed as if they made their own light, independent of the strobe. The figure didn't look up. The repair's hands moved with the practiced speed of somebody who knows any minute a truck might need this room to stay clear. Lionel held 45 and kept his lane without wobble. He wanted to touch the horn, a small salute to a person being brave in a precarious place. He didn't. The no honking on the bridge signs have a way of reminding people that noise can turn simple tasks into mistakes. 2 minutes after the lights fell out of his mirrors, a barge horn sounded somewhere far off and low, a sound like a tired animal deciding to say, "I'm here." The world beyond the bridge stayed a trick of distance and shadow. He kept it at 45 longer than duty required, and then slid back to 60 with care, the way a person stands again after they've bent to tie a shoe on a staircase and remembers a story someone told them once about balance. He told himself he would ignore the phone if it rang again. It did not, for a while. He drove. The line of reflectors on the right clicked by in pairs like patient blinking eyes. He thought of the old yellow boxes the way one thinks of mile markers, small, practical comforts that could, if asked, become something more. The Knights do that to objects. They make them more themselves. At marker 129, the phone lit. It said, "Public telephone, WB 129, as if he had asked it to be so precise. He didn't touch it. The ring stayed single. One bell in the air, and then it ended. He breathed. He considered that advice. If you can, do not answer twice. It had come in speech that felt older than cell towers, older than online maps, older even than the flat voice of recorded traffic messages that pronounced names with perky indifference. It sounded like something a person behind a switchboard in a room with beige walls says at 3 in the morning, because they have learned that repeating an answer invites problems. When the fog came, it didn't creep. It arrived. He could see the road perfectly. And then he could see only a circle the size of a small room. The lamps made walls of light. The water below might as well have been a long empty lot. He eased again, no brakes, just intention. His hands were steady. The rumble strip on the right hummed once, a reassurance that the world had edges. He reached for the radio and then did the old-fashioned thing. He turned it down to nothing and let the cab be quiet so he could hear the small sounds that announce changes before they show themselves. The bell rang. Somewhere, close, a box's door was open. The phone lit. Public telephone WB 131. That strange, formal message came over the wire. Quiet. A person speaking like distance matters. When it is like this, the operator said, count the seams between the slabs. There are 3 long, then 1 short, then 3 long again. Let them measure you through while you keep your lane tight. Confirm if you are counting. He hadn't known that. The seams, when you listen for them, do announce themselves 3 long clicks of tire at the joins, then a shorter rhythm where the span changes age or repair. It was as true as a bit of sheet music. He whispered, not on the line, to his own dashboard. 3, 1, 3. He let the pattern be the rope he held. Fog swallowed the world so completely for a quarter mile that he could have believed he was parked in a room with his lamps aimed at a painted wall. When it thinned, it did so with kindness, showing him gradually the beads of the center line, then the full line, then the far rail where spider webs of frost looked briefly like lace. He felt the moment he could let his shoulders lower. The bell did not ring. The operator did not speak. At the east end, where the basin gives way to land, and the bridge eases back to the plain fact of ground, a way station sits in a gentle curve. A big sign announced "Open," a surprise at that hour. Lionel took the ramp without arguing with his plans. The scales hummed under his axles. A trooper leaned out of a booth and looked like he had learned the faces of more drivers than most people meet in a year. He waved Lionel to stop in a marked box and stepped out into the chill. "All right tonight?" the trooper asked. The tone was conversational, the way someone asks a neighbor if the storm knocked out power on their side of the street. "Bridge is fine," Lionel said. He considered adding the rest, and decided he wasn't being asked to explain his whole night to anyone. Debris around 126. Someone already fixing a box. The trooper's head tilted a fraction, a tiny movement that registered but did not clearly belong to interest or amusement. "Debris was real," he said. "Got a report from a four-wheeler and a truck. We sent a unit, but you wouldn't have seen him. The maintenance guy was working on a cabinet. Phone lines are decommissioned out there, so he's sealing gaps the rain opened. Folks call us sometimes and say they heard bells. Humidity, I guess. Whined through. Some old metal tongue that still wants to sing." Lionel accepted the weight slip the trooper didn't need to write. He watched the small piece of paper settle in his hand with a seriousness that didn't belong to its actual importance. "You get calls from the boxes?" he asked, feeling foolish and doing it anyway. "Not the boxes," the trooper said, tone softening as if he were stepping into a story he had told before and liked. "Every now and then we get calls saying the box called them. Old-timer I worked with used to say the bridge remembers the operator who worked Hurricane Lila. Fellow sat at a switchboard taking calls from stranded motorists in the late 70s and talking them through the dark. When it gets wet enough and quiet enough, some of what he said finds its way back in. People hear what they need to hear to keep them steady. Count your seams. Watch for pallets. Don't stop in a fog. It's strange. Doesn't hurt anybody." He smiled once in a way that said he didn't need to be understood, only to be the person he was. "You be safe." Back in the lot behind the station, Lionel parked long enough to write the debris location in his book and put a note in the company app for other drivers. He reached for his phone to check the call log, just to understand what shape the night would take in the morning when his mind wanted to turn it into something simple. The log showed nothing. No public telephone, WB anything. No missed call. No voicemail. In the temporary storage for recent notifications, a banner pulsed and then slid away before he could tap it. He saw only the first two words. "Do not." He pulled down the visor to find his sunglasses, and something thin slid into his lap, a folded instruction card from a previous carrier, the kind that reminds drivers about winter driving on bridges. It had been there a long time, edges rounded, a coffee stain turned to a watercolor. In the margin, in tidy, common handwriting, someone had written a single line. "Answer once." He didn't remember placing it there. He didn't remember anyone he had driven with who wrote in that hand. Maybe he'd tucked it away from a bulletin board one afternoon on some other job. Maybe somebody had slipped it into a visor as a kindness. The road collects small artifacts from strangers. They become a kind of travel kit that belongs to everyone. He took the last miles to his exit easy, in no rush to step out of the shape the night had made. At the truck stop beyond the curve, a laminated photo on a wall by the coffee machine showed a room full of old equipment, tan metal boxes, coiled cords, a switchboard with plugs like fat knitting needles. A man sat there, elbows on the counter, chin down in focus. He wore a tie loosened at the collar. The caption read, "Basin Operations Emergency Communications, 1979. Someone had added a small star sticker next to his shoulder. A note below said, "In honor of the team that kept folks calm when the water rose." Lionel nodded, to no one, and to whoever needed the acknowledgement. He bought beef jerky and a banana, and let the ordinary weight of those objects settle him back into the daylight to come. When he climbed back into the cab, he took the instruction card and slid it under the clear cover on the dash where drivers keep permits and emergency contacts. The words were simple as a road sign. The advice was the sort that grows true by being repeated. Answer once. People talk about the Basin Bridge the way sailors talk about currents. They say if you're out there when the fog pulls a blanket and the water has more to say than the sky, you might hear a bell that hasn't rung in decades and a voice that knows the shape of the road better than the road sometimes does. They don't argue about the how. They don't ask what it wants. They listen, they steer, and they keep to their lane. And they agree on one small courtesy, passed along in the same even tone men and women on wires used when the world went strange. If the old phone calls, pick up once and let it go quiet after. Some instructions on the night highway feel almost like superstition. They also happen to work. Story number 4. Rain in the mountains has a different voice than rain on the plains. It has more places to speak from: needles, rock faces, old timber, the undersides of bridges, and it keeps a rhythm that changes with elevation. On a high pass in the Pacific Northwest, where the road cuts a long S through fir and cedar, and the air smells like cold bark, a tanker truck rolled after midnight with food-grade oil sloshing slow in its belly. The driver, a man named Cole, kept his hands easy on the wheel and his eyes steady on the right seam of the lane. He preferred to run heavy in the rain. Tires made honest sounds then. Engines liked the cool. He had topped off at a valley stop, where the coffee tasted faintly of pine from the paper cups, checked the dome lights over his tank to be sure all the caps were clean, and eased into the climb, knowing his next hour would be a conversation with gravity. The variable message board at the base of the grade announced chain-up areas open in tall amber letters that didn't make sense on a night that was wet but warm. A state trooper idled in the median with no lights, only the faint glimmer of reflective striping letting the car be visible if a person already knew to look. Cole told himself the sign was stuck on a winter script, and the car was another mind parked with the rain. Up in the trees, the fog hung low, more like breath than cloud. Snow fences lined the cut in places, even though the only white this time of year came from waterfalls, turning to lace when wind blew through them. On the left, in a ditch, a long net of chain lay against the rock, meant to catch small slides before they turned to large ones. Every 100 yards or so, a green milepost blinked by, neat as a metronome. The truck's wipers thok-thoked in a pattern that had become background long ago. The ELD offered him time, blocks neat and easy. The gauges held their ground. Around the first major curve, a sawhorse sign appeared, on the shoulder where none usually lived. It was old wood, weathered gray, with a reflective arrow bolted to its face and paint drips hardened, like tears from a season long done. The arrow pointed right, its edge nicked. County and state crews usually use bright metal stands for temporary directions now, all legs and clips. This sawhorse looked like a backroads warning dragged onto a highway. Behind it, a bright orange detour placard leaned, rain flattening its flapping corners. "Detour," the black letters shouted. Cole's GPS offered nothing about a route change. It was a good system, used to talking. Quiet now. He eased a little more attention into his mirrors, and kept on. 100 yards later, another sawhorse, same arrow, same old wood. This time, a small ribbon of pink surveyor's tape fluttered from its crosspiece. In the beam of his headlights, the tape looked like a tongue speaking a word nobody needed to hear. He scanned the road ahead. Lanes were open, no crew, no cones, no work lights. The rain hissed like static from a radio left low. The third sawhorse stood just before a pullout, with a sign that called itself a chain-up area. The asphalt widened and turned to coarse gravel, puddles respectful of their depressions. On the pavement, chalk numbers ghosted the spaces, as if someone had held class out here. 1, 2, 3 inches block figures, then a gap, then 4, 5, 6, scuffed nearly to nothing. The numbers weren't fresh. The rain made a film of them, pale against the dark. An old coffee cup lay on its side under the signpost, and a coil of bungee cord just to its right looked like a small sleeping animal until his lights snuck up on it and made it inanimate again. He passed, steady. The detour arrow pointed right where the chain area gave way to a short connector down to an older piece of road. It was the sort of stub that exists because highways grow in layers, and when a new alignment is cut cleaner across a slope, the old one sometimes stays as a frontage. He had run this pass enough to know the piece. It paralleled the main for 1,000 feet, then tucked under to join again. Truckers used it when a wreck turned everything into a parking lot. Tonight the main lanes were alive and moving. Still, the arrows kept insisting, barely polite. Cole didn't move over. His rule on mountains was simple. Trust what is signed big and lit. Be careful with what is signed small and old. He rode the high line and let the stub slide by on his right, empty and dark. In his mirror, for a blink, he thought he saw a pair of amber lights pull from the stub and match his pace 100 yards back. They were low, not the height of a truck. Hazard lights? No headlights. Then a curtain of fog took the reflection and made it meaningless. His phone dinged once with the flat tone of an emergency alert. Not the blast that makes bones remember drills, but the smaller one that suggests a local road change. He glanced long enough to see a banner slide in and fade before he could touch it. Old alignment advisories in effect, it had almost said. He caught the shape of the words, and then they were gone. The radio was quiet, save for a faint hiss that could have been the heater fan working a very particular speed. The road narrowed where rock leaned close. A rail ran along the edge to kiss the idea of a drop without committing to it. The reflectors on that rail were new, bright oval jewels nailed at intervals. He let his eyes find them one by one when the fog thickened, the way a person might follow stitches across a mended seam. 3 bright, then a gap, then 2, then 3 again. Patterns help on long nights. He counted not to pass time, but to live inside it. Past the second curve where the old CCC stonework still showed in a retaining wall. Rounded rocks mortared into a smile. The rain changed its voice. It turned finer, dampened by a canopy that grew denser. Wipers fell into time with the subtle thrum of tires across joints cut into the concrete. Far ahead, a dull glow bloomed and wavered. For half a second, he thought it was the kind of construction light that fills a work zone with false noon. Then it resolved into a small bar of amber on the roofline of a vehicle that had tucked itself ahead on the right shoulder. It was an SUV with a short utility rack and a magnetic sign on the tailgate that flipped up on 2 small hinges. The sign said in black block letters on a white background, "Follow me." Not digital, not scrolling, just the literal black on white that old escort cars carried before amber LEDs and programmable boards made everything neat. The hazard lights clicked in a steady, patient tempo. The SUV pulled onto the lane with confidence and did not outpace him or crawl. It chose a speed that felt like it had been set by a person who knew how much truck was behind him. Cole checked his mirrors again to see if the state cruiser below had moved. He saw nothing but rain and his own trailer shape. The "Follow Me" sign looked hand-lettered. When the water ran across it, a slight wobble to the E that perfect machine letters never have. He thought of pilot cars he'd run behind on 2 lanes when oversized loads were his world, men and women leaning out their window to wave in tight spots and tapping their brake twice when they wanted to set a tone without getting on the radio. His CB was on low. No voice offered instructions. The SUV's amber bar broadcast a steady promise instead. This is a speed that will work. The SUV led him to the next on-ramp-like connector down to the old road. This time, the detour sawhorses weren't just on the shoulder. One had been placed half into the lane with its arrow pointing firmly toward the lower piece. Rain made the black of the arrow gleam. The main line ahead disappeared into cloud that sat on the deck like it had stopped to catch its breath. Cole felt the tug of his own rule and waited against the presence of the truck in front of him. The SUV's left signal flashed twice. It wanted him down and around, where the air looked clearer. He took the connector. The banked old pavement felt narrower and more intimate. Moss grew in a seam by the rail, soft green on gray. The SUV kept a generous lead and did not change its pace. The detour placards along this section wore fresh stakes, as if someone had planted them this afternoon, though their faces were still weathered. He saw pencil writing on one stake, a note from some human in the chain. Bridge rail slick. The handwriting was tidy and plain, the kind that looks the same whether it's on a grocery list or a survey tag. The old road traced the hillside under the newer one, then slipped through a short tunnel that looked more like a culvert given grand ambitions. A stone arch, wet and shining, with streaks of orange where water had ironed its way through. The SUV's lights flickered through it and came out the other side with a little shake. His tanker murmured behind him as the liquid leaned and corrected. He kept his foot light and let the truck's patience be a tool. Beyond the tunnel, the old alignment crossed a wooden deck bridge, the kind with planks bolted down in long runs and a posted limit that still embarrassed itself by admitting to 40 tons. The deck's slats hummed and then drummed under him in a way that would have been music if a person were the kind to find songs in infrastructure. The rail's reflectors were the small round glass marbles from another era. They made a wet galaxy when his lamps found them. Halfway over, a small stone skipped down the embankment to his right and tapped the rail with a sound like a wedding ring against a glass. A rock net above ticked in a slow cascade. The SUV's sign flipped down for a heartbeat, as if a gloved hand had lifted and lowered it, and then the message faced him again. "Follow me." On the far side of the bridge, the old road bent toward the newer one, but a pile of loose rock had slid across the return ramp, not a full closure. Not even a real hazard if a person were empty in a pickup and felt like pinball. In a tanker at weight with wet brakes and a belly that wanted to move, it was a kind of riddle that could be answered 3 ways and only one that didn't invite a story told in the wrong tone later. The SUV took the third leg of a Y that he hadn't noticed until it used an access path carved by maintenance trucks, a line of broad tire tracks in gravel that looked like new teeth planted in the mountain's jaw. He followed. The access path brought them under the belly of a climbing lane, where rain fell in beads through seams in concrete, and made strings like water curtains in a stage play. Graffiti on one pillar said, simply, slow. The letters were old, a decade at least, softened by moss and time. The same tidy hand that liked straight lines and plain statements. His headlights gave the word a fresh coat of meaning, and left it. The SUV's brake lights bloomed and faded twice, at a cattle guard set into the road where the forest and a scrubby open slope met. No cattle up here, not for a long time, but the grate sang when the tires rolled over it, a metallic harp under weight. Cole felt his rig adjust, springs making their small conversations. On the far side, they rejoined the main alignment where fog lifted in a torn curtain and the bigger road was itself again wide, crowned right, ready to receive what the night brought. The SUV slid ahead another 100 yards, hazard bar steady, then moved to the shoulder as if it had reached the end of an invisible line. The "Follow Me" placard flipped down, landing with a soft thud he couldn't possibly have heard over rain and engine and yet felt he had. In the driver's window, there was a shape of someone seated. He couldn't make a face through the misted glass, only the sense of a presence turned forward, waiting for the next lane to clear. He pulled alongside with the respectful space of one professional passing another, lifted a hand to his side window without expecting acknowledgement, and checked his mirrors as he took the lane. His trailer lights ran little rivers of white down the wet guardrail. When he looked back to see the SUV rejoin, there was nothing on the shoulder but the glimmer of a wet mile marker, and a strip of pink tape caught on blackberry vine, fluttering as if it were breathing. Miles later, at the summit where a dark lot and a locked kiosk marked the seasonal snow park, he pulled into a turnout to check his caps and put a hand on the tank's belly, the way he did sometimes to remind the liquid and the machine and himself that everything had a place. Under the sodium light, rain made the air gold. On the post of the map board, a laminated sheet hung with information about winter rules. A corner had curled, and under it, a different paper had been tucked the top of an old detour map from a landslide years before. In its margin, in the same tidy handwriting he'd seen penciled on the stake, a line had been added in ballpoint. Do not pass the escort on the grade. Maybe a maintenance foreman had left it there last season. Maybe a stranger had written it to be kind. Maybe it had been there for years, and his eyes only had time for it tonight. He put the map back how he found it, and checked his mirrors for the habit of it. Fog moved like breath around the edges of the lot, giving shape to the trees and taking it away again. On the descent, he kept his speed a whisper under what the post had allowed, and let the engine hold him. Water ran in straight lines down cut faces on the left, and curled into channels like handwriting where moss and fern guided it. The idea of the SUV stayed with him in a practical way, not an unsettling one. He had followed instructions. He had, for once, not argued with a detour set by older hands than his, even when the weights and measures of his mind suggested otherwise. At the scale house on the far side, where the grade gives itself back to river bottom, the red open sign was on. He rolled in, accepted the ritual of the way like a person accepts a handshake, and watched the officer in the booth glance at his numbers, and then at him with the slow curiosity of someone who has time to ask questions if asking is needed. "How'd you come through?" the officer said. "Wet but fine," Cole answered. He didn't reach for more words, but the night had given him a few, and they wanted to be used. Somebody's running an escort up there. Old "Follow Me" sign. Took the old alignment and the maintenance cut to clear a slide. The officer's mouth tilted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No one scheduled," he said. "We shut the old return ramp last month. Rock came down again this evening, small stuff. We haven't set cones yet, raining too hard earlier to do it safe. Dispatch said they got a call that an SUV was guiding a few trucks along the maintenance path. When the trooper went up, he didn't see anybody, but he said it looked like fresh tracks on the gravel and some stake tape moved along. Could be one of the statewide maintenance guys on his own time. Could be folks looking out for each other the way they always have. Either way, you took a good line. We tell people, if you find a guide on the grade and they know the work, don't pass." Cole nodded. He resisted the urge to tell the officer about the handwriting, the sawhorses that looked like memory, the way the SUV's sign wobbled when water ran across it. These were the sorts of details the night keeps for itself and lets go of only when they can be folded into simple advice later. He took the slip he didn't need to keep, tucked it into the clip on his visor, and pulled out of the lane with a feeling that the truck was a shade lighter in the way that has nothing to do with weight. A diner sat just beyond the scales with a lighted window and a plant that had learned how to live in fluorescent conditions. Inside, over a case of pies and under a black and white photograph of the pass in 1958, a small corkboard held handbills and flyers. A wrinkled card showed a pilot car service number, half the ink sun-faded. Under it, a yellowing newspaper clipping pinned with a thumbtack told the story of a slide that cut the highway for 8 days back in a spring no one remembered precisely. In the photo, an SUV with a roof bar and a "Follow Me" sign that could have been the same one waited at the mouth of a gravel track. The caption named a foreman with a clean, straightforward first name. There was no date stamped on the clip. Someone had sketched a star next to the sign with a pen. Arguments about what happened on mountains often run into fog. People choose the version that settles them. The pie was pecan in this place, rich and oddly appropriate in a way he couldn't have explained. On his way back out into the rain, Cole found a small strip of survey tape caught under his wiper. It might have blown there when he had parked under the lot lamp. It might have been a kindness from the wind. It was pink, the same shade he had seen on the stakes. In tidy, everyday handwriting, someone had written 2 words in permanent marker: "Stay patient." He smoothed the tape with his thumb, set it in the dash cubby where receipts go to become stories, and brought the truck back onto the river road. People say the mountain takes care of its own in ways that don't fit paperwork. They say that when old alignments become ghost trails and the new ones forget to tell the whole truth on a wet night, a guide with a simple sign and a steady speed will appear where it's needed and vanish where things are easy again. They say the best thing to do on a grade, whether the sky is full of stars or made of falling water, is to keep hands gentle. Count what can be counted: reflectors, seams, breaths, and if something in the dark asks for the courtesy of being trusted, offer it, and don't try to pass. It is not an order. It is a way of getting home. Story number 5. He had crossed the high desert so many times that he could recite the mile markers in his sleep, and sometimes he did. Marcus ran a refrigerated rig for long hauls between farm lots and distant distribution centers, the kind of work that coached a person into slow breathing and patient thoughts. The night he remembered most began under a sky so clear it looked like glass stretched taut over a cold table. Stars flickered like the reflection of distant truck stop signs. He kept the radio low, more for company than for music. His truck purred, a steady animal, a promise. The route was simple: take the interstate, past the old way station that had been closed for years, then continue through the long empty stretch until town lights gathered like embers. The desert air held that crisp, metallic scent that meant a cold dawn to come. Mile marker 214 slid by. He checked fuel, checked the temperature in the trailer, checked the clock on the dash. 1-7. The gauge lights made a small constellation of their own. He drank a mouthful of coffee that tasted like warm pennies but did the job. The radio hissed, a thin serpent. A voice broke through for just a breath, then clipped. He turned the knob a hair and got nothing but sea surf static. It wasn't unusual out there. The land rolled and the signal traveled like a hesitant traveler. Mile marker 215. He saw the leaning billboard for the shuttered diner, with a hand-painted promise of pie. The paint had flaked down to something that looked like lace. Every driver knew it. That sign was a friend. Mile marker 216. The road flattened, and a single saguaro stood like a sentinel at the edge of the shoulder. Its arms looked too perfectly arranged, like it had practiced in a mirror, and was proud of the pose. Mille marqué 217. He glanced at the clock. 1:13. The radio popped. A phrase tumbled through, fragmentary. Keep your lane. Don't. Keep your lane. It sounded like a recording that had been played a few too many times. He smiled at nothing, at the night that liked to play little tricks. The truck's hum steadied into a lullaby. He set his jaw, rolled his shoulders, kept his eyes soft. The road opened into a gentle curve. Far ahead, something reflective flickered, a trailer perhaps, catching his lights. He expected to gain on it slowly, but the flicker remained at the same distance, like a lighthouse bobbing in someone else's sea. Mille marqué 214. He frowned. It had to be a mistake. He must have blinked through 218 and not noticed. The desert played those kinds of games. Still, the diner sign appeared again, its hand-painted promise. He knew that flaking lace pattern. He turned down the radio completely and listened to the truck, to the night, to his pulse. Mile marker 215. The Saguaro Sentinel. Mile marker 216. The Curve. Mile marker 217. The clock read 1:13 again. Exactly. He watched it change to 1:14. No. It trembled and stayed. He rubbed his eye with the heel of his hand and laughed, a small sound that felt too loud in the cab. He reached for the CB. Anyone out eastbound around the close scale? His voice sounded calm, practiced. The kind of voice that could ask for anything and accept any answer. Static leaned in like rain. A voice returned, soft and thin, words in pieces, as if traveling through a straw. Eastbound, closed station. Keep your lane. He couldn't tell if it came from near or far. He imagined another driver, maybe a county away, just as sleepless. Mile marker 214. The billboard with flaked paint. He passed it, then held the wheel a little tighter. He touched the dash clock as if it were a pet that needed reassurance. 1:13. On the third repetition, he began to test the world. He slid a penny from the cup holder and placed it upright in a groove beneath the windshield. The next time the curve unfurled, he pressed the washer spray, and one swipe of the wipers held a small arc of dampness in the glass, just enough to leave a fingerprint in the dry. Then the diner sign. Then the Saguaro Sentinel. Then the curve that felt like déjà vu shaped into asphalt. His penny fell. The damp arc had dried. The clock was loyal to a single minute. At the next marker, he let the rig slow by 2 miles an hour. No cruise control on. Just the weight of the engine and the measured fall of gravity towing him forward. Somewhere behind the black horizon, the mountains held their breath. Mile marker 214 again, but this time the billboard looked marginally more decayed, its wooden posts browner, like they had been burned around the edges. He couldn't swear it, but something felt moved by a centimeter. He stopped the radio entirely and listened to the unseen geometry of the highway. In the distance, the reflective gleam returned. A trailer ahead, holding speed. He watched the glint, the way it bounced across road imperfections. A line of rivets caught his beams. The pattern was familiar, unnervingly so. He eased closer, not enough to tail, just enough to study it. He saw a scrape along the lower corner of the doors, 2 diagonal lines like a careless fork. He had the same mark, from a dock whose ramp jumped once on a windy day. He increased the gap again, breath measured, heartbeat steady. It could be any trailer. It could be a mirror of a very common mistake. He allowed doubt to do its job, to calm, to explain, to quiet a mind that wanted to make pictures. He passed the old exit sign for the frontage road that had been removed years before, the post empty, the arrow gone. Yet past the curve it showed again for a second, green with peeling reflective film, a ghost of its old self. He blinked, and it returned to an empty post. The truck's engine inhaled and exhaled. The long, flat hiss of tires on distant highway arrived a beat before a sound that wasn't his. He glanced to the right, to the boundary where scrub brush met the shoulder. He thought he saw tracks, one set, then 2, sliding down from the low gravel and back up again, as if multiple heavy rigs had run their wheels into the same groove, over and over. Maybe the Department of Transportation's grader had scored it. Maybe memory was scoring him. He took the frontage road when it appeared, instinct rather than plan. The turn was wide, the pavement changed under him, from fresh, dark aggregate to pale concrete that carried a smear of the past. The truck hummed lower, like it was relieved or sleepy. He could feel the texture through the steering wheel, a kind of chatter. The old way station rose from the darkness like a closed eyelid. Windows dusty. A sign hung crooked against its chain-link fence. Closed. It had been closed for years. Everyone knew that. Yet tonight, the roof light flickered on and off, in no steady rhythm. He idled to a calm stop, engine steady, and looked at the scale pad. Its surface held a powder of dust broken by shoe prints that began and ended too cleanly. like punctuation. He stayed in his seat. He had no need to open the door. The air carried a faint electrical buzz, the voice of a fence working when plugged into nothing. The intercom by the booth burped out a single tone, the kind a scanner makes when it finds a frequency it doesn't trust. Then a number, 73. Then silence. His rig, full, ran closer to 80,000 pounds, but the single number had an odd, polite gravity to it, as if someone were practicing counting. He placed the truck in gear and rolled, the weight tugging at his ribs the way it did when he pulled away on any slope. The frontage road rejoined the interstate with a plain merge that had seen better days. He blinked, and the merge lane shifted by an inch, then snapped back, like an old film splicing itself. He guided the nose of the truck onto the open road. Mille marqué 214. His jaw unclenched and clenched again. The diner sign stood with its lace of peeling paint. He could tell a new detail now. A smudge of brown on the bottom corner. Water. Or age. Had it been there before? He touched the penny in its groove and found it wasn't there. It lay on the rubber mat by his shoe, as if it had just fallen, as if no more than a minute had passed. He counted the dotted lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He breathed with each, letting his chest expand like a measured bellows. The radio, though off, clicked as if something inside it had adjusted to a new weather. Mile marker 215. The Saguaro Sentinel. He watched its silhouette, expecting the same angle, the same arrangement of arms. He found a subtle difference, or thought he did. A bird's nest that hadn't appeared before. A small crown of sticks. Had the night put it there? Mile marker 216. The curve opened like a mouth forming a word. The reflective gleam ahead returned, ever so slightly closer. He did not change speed. He let the truck be a metronome. He let the road be a song without a chorus. Mile marker 217. The clock shivered and moved to 114. A bird cut across the headlight beam and was gone. A small smudge of dark. He realized then that he had not seen a single piece of litter on the shoulder for however long he'd been inside this narrowing loop. No wrappers, no forgotten strips of blown tire, no glinting bottles making mischief with headlight beams. The desert was too clean. That was its strangest quality. He lifted the CB mic again, thumb pressing its button. Before he could speak, a voice came in clear. Not the fragile straw sound, but something close, with the simple patience of a person who had been waiting. "Keep your lane," it said. "You're almost through." He looked at the speaker as if it could meet his gaze. He wanted to ask what through meant, but then the voice finished, almost kindly. "Don't look too hard at the mirrors. Wine, ass, end, of end." He didn't. He took that advice like a warm blanket and set it across his shoulders. He watched the road widen by a breath, then narrow again. He watched the reflective pinprick ahead align with the center line of his lane, then stray. He kept his lane. He kept his breathing slow. The billboard arrived, but not entirely familiar. A new sticker had been slapped over the word pie. In the yellow wash of the headlights, he could almost read it. A stylized dog's face, black and white, with the words, "Rescue Today." He had never seen that sticker on this old sign. It didn't belong, and yet it made perfect sense, the way an old town sign sometimes carried a newer cause. A breeze pressed against the cab from the left, not enough to push him, just a palm laid gently on his shoulder. He smelled creosote, clean and damp-smelling, even though the ground had not seen rain. Ahead, the reflective gleam shifted, then brightened, then resolved, finally, into a square of red and white tape on a set of trailer doors that matched his own. The diagonal scrape, the rivet pattern, the little replaced bulb on the upper right. He did not gain on it. He did not lose it. He kept his lane. Mille marqué 218. The number came like a soft chime. His lungs realized they had been tight. The clock advanced to 117 without theatricality. The reflective square ahead lost definition, became only an honest truck in the distance that ran whether anyone watched it or not. He glanced, briefly, into his passenger mirror, and saw nothing unusual. His trailer, a split seam of night, his own marker lights making a tidy row of red dots that danced and blinked like a pocketful of fireflies. He laughed again. This time it sounded like what it was, a quiet, relieved thing that did not mock or editorialize. He found the radio knob and brought in the low rustle of distant voices on Channel 19. Someone argued about the best breakfast burrito 2 towns over. Someone called a lane closure ahead. The normalcy walked right into his cab and sat down. When the next exit appeared, a simple ramp with a stand of cottonwood trees huddled nearby, he took it. The rest area lay just beyond. A shallow bowl of light and vending machines. A map with a burned-out bulb above it. He parked even, aligned with the faded white bricks on the pavement, and let the engine wind down. He sat with his hands where they were. The palms resonated with a memory of vibration. The night had softened. Crickets began work, or had been working all along and were, only now, allowed back into his attention. A pickup idled 3 spots down. Its driver, a young man in a ball cap, stepped out, stretched, walked inside for a cola. The world wore its ordinary jacket again. At dawn, he rolled forward, checked the straps on his load, looked down at the dirt gathered on his steps. There was a small mark near the bottom of the door, a pale thread of dust that ran diagonally. He brushed it away and realized it had the same angle as the scrape on his trailer's doors. It meant nothing. It meant everything. He brushed it away again, just to be sure. Later, a month on and half a country away, he mentioned the old way station to another driver over cafeteria eggs. The other man shook his head and said the county had taken the booths down last year. "It's just a slab now," the man said. "No fence, not even a sign. Cleaned it like it was never there." Marcus smiled and made a neutral sound as if the coffee were too hot. He felt a small, cool line run down the center of his spine, a ribbon of knowing, as fine as a thread. He imagined a number spoken into static 73 and decided not to share that part. He passed that stretch again months later in daylight. The Saguaro Sentinel stood, arms out, and a crow straddled one joint as if debating a sermon. The diner sign had fallen entirely, a rectangle of painted wood face down in the scrub. The empty post of the frontage road remained. He watched the clock roll past and did not hold his breath. The mile markers ticked like a perfect metronome. 214, 215, 216, 217. Lambaishaba. When the highway opened wide after the curve, a small house of wind lifted across the fields, and the rig pushed through it like a boat entering a friendly current. It would have been easy to explain. Fatigue. A windshield reflection. A menacing coincidence with a trailer stripe that echoed his own. A radio skip, throwing the same words back again. He accepted all explanations with a generous nod, then let them sit and be what they were, very good explanations. At night, on quiet stretches, he kept one extra penny near the dash, and sometimes set it standing. It had no job to do anymore. It only watched, the way a small object can watch, ready to fall if the moment asked. On another fall night, the desert entered his peripheral vision with that old slow grace. He reached the same long curve, and he talked to the road inside his head like he always did. He kept his lane. He did not look too hard at the mirrors. He let the truck do the heavy work and let the miles open and close. Whatever had pressed in on that minute of time had lifted and gone, like fog that burns off and leaves nothing damp. And still, when the highway grew quiet enough to hear the wires sing, when a bird cut across the beam and the night parted for him, he felt that kind tone arrive out of memory and take a seat beside him, the way a helpful phrase can live under the skin. Story number 6. She preferred the high passes at night, the way the mountains kept their voice low so the engine could be the one doing the talking. Elena ran the west slope often enough to know every grade sign, every turnout with sand scattered like spilled salt. Early winter had come softly, a shawl of white on the peaks, patches of frost turning the shoulder pale. The forecast promised a storm by morning. She would be on the other side by then, tucked into a quiet lot with the reefer humming and a thermos cooling on the dash. The climb began clean. A long incline, a warning about a 6% grade, a reminder about using lower gears. The sky was a velvet lid with a hole punched in it for a moon. Her headlights made a tunnel of visibility and a kind of obligation. What they touched, she owned, at least for a breath. She listened to the tires purr on the fresh asphalt and kept the radio at a level where voices were less conversation and more weather. The CB chattered with ordinary talkwind at the summit, deer near the tree line, a patrol car tucked behind a billboard with peeling paint that advertised a lodge everyone knew was closed. At a turnout just before the crest, a set of orange signs appeared, clean as if right out of a box. Roadwork ahead. Detour. Pilot car follow me. The arrows pulsed with a steady glow, not too bright, perfectly legible. She hadn't heard a word about construction on this stretch. She slowed, seeing the first set of cones. Bright, arranged with someone's square mind. Beyond them, the shape of a white car waited with an amber bar on the roof and an illuminated board on the tailgate. Follow me, the letters crystal and calm. Wasn't any work up here yesterday? Someone said on the radio, voice half amused. But I'm on the eastbound. Westbound, you got a pilot? Elena thumbed her mic. I've got one, she said. White Ford light bar on the roof. No flagger, just the signs. Static was a long exhale. Copy that, a woman replied. Slow and steady, westbound. Ice near the lookout. Elena rolled to a glide, easing behind the pilot car. It was an older model. The kind with squared edges and a bumper that looked honest. The amber bar over its roof rotated instead of flashing. A slow, circular sweep that painted the frost with gentle light. She checked for a person inside, but the glare on the glass only gave her a suggestion of a headrest, a steering wheel, a silhouette that could have been anything. The detour left the main line and clipped the old scenic byway, a route she had taken once years ago in daylight to stretch her legs and take photographs. Tonight, it was a single, narrow lane through the firs. Portable work lamps stood at intervals, tall and silent, casting a soft white. She expected the grind of a generator somewhere in the trees. There was none, only the hum of her own rig and the far whisper of wind combing needles. She ran her speed down to 25, respect and prudence sharing the wheel. The pilot car held the pace exactly, its amber blades swinging, the follow me board unwavering. The first curve opened, and a canyon appeared to their right. Black, a breath, a suggestion of forever. The guardrail wore a gloss of frost that turned her beams into a ribbon. The old byway narrowed further, the kind of one lane that asked for courtesy and patience. Signs on stands marked it with tidy handwriting. Single lane. Yield to opposing traffic. She saw no opposing anything. In the lamp's glow, reflective tape made halos around every cone. She keyed the mic. White pilot with the light bar? You got comms? Her voice didn't fill her cab. It felt like a letter she had sealed and sent. Nothing came back. The CB had gone to its usual ocean noise. She reached for the stereo to turn up the gas station, then left it where it was. The silence wasn't empty. It just wasn't busy. At the second bend, the road crossed a small truss bridge. She knew it by the geometry. Triangles upon triangles, steel painted a workmanlike green. Tonight it felt closer to the truck, like it had leaned in. She eased onto the planks and felt a slight change in tone, a wooden music under the tires. On the uprights, little ribbons had been tied, faded and recent both, safety orange bleached to pink by Sunday. They fluttered in the breath of the mountain. The pilot car rolled off the bridge and paused a heartbeat, just enough for her to catch up. Its rear board flickered for a moment, a wave of static across its letters, and in that flicker she thought she saw a different message swell and vanish. Thank you for slowing. Then follow me returned, steady as a metronome. The lamps ahead made a corridor through fog that came and went like a mood. Frost dusted the needles. A deer stood in the ditch, made of shadow and patience, its eyes reflecting quiet planets. It watched them pass without alarm. She could smell cold iron and fir sap. She could feel her own breath warmer than the night. They threaded around a rock slide that had bitten into the shoulder. The cone steered a lazy S around it. Elena watched each one as if it might choose to be a rabbit at the last minute. The pilot car drifted left, right, left, a choreography that asked for trust. She gave it, but she noticed things. The absence of tire tracks in the thin sugar of frost where the pilot's wheels turned. The way its license plate reflected a green that didn't match the current series. The paint on the letters "Follow Me" was not pixels or bulbs. It was the old marquee style, tiny individual lenses glowing like beads of rain. Between two stands of light, the mountain leaned over them like an elder, bending to hear a secret. Her ABS light blinked once and held, then went away of its own will. She checked her mirror out of habit and saw her trailer running true, its side a long, unbroken night. In the far distance of the reflection, a mirror of the amber blade turned, as if there were another pilot car behind her. She didn't look twice. She instead watched the road, the small pale strip of centerline, the promise of the next lamp. At the third bend, the detour left the old byway and took a service road she had never noticed in daylight. Narrower, this one felt like a ribbon, unspooled by a careful hand. The lamps here were closer, their poles casting long shadows that grew and then retracted as she went. She heard something like a distant radio voice. A work zone message, too faint to make out more than a tone. When the wind shifted, words stood up in it. Work zone speed 25, fines doubled, thank you for slowing. The phrase had the cadence of memory, not a live voice. Her palms had gone dry on the wheel. She laughed softly, the kind that fogs a window. "All right," she said to the dashboard, and meant it. She was not alarmed. She was, in some wordless way, honored. This night had chosen to be odd in a polite way. The pilot car braked, and she brought the rig down behind it. The road kinked around a temporary barrier and slid onto fresh asphalt where she expected dirt. Not a seam showed. If someone told her the detour had been poured that afternoon, she would have believed it, except for the absence of smell, no tar, no gasoline, nothing but pine and cold light. A low wooden sign slipped past on her left, tucked in the brush. It was black and simple, white hand-painted letters that someone had made carefully long ago. Slow is safe. She had seen that phrase on a safety calendar once, in red with a cartoon turtle. Here, it read like a blessing. The grade tipped gently down, and the mountain opened its ribs. The pilot car's amber light baton swept the trunks and made them momentarily bronze. When a gust crossed the pass, she felt the trailer lean and corrected with a movement as small as a nod. The follow me board flickered again, not to confuse, but to reassure, like someone at a door reminding you that you are expected. Then the lamps thinned, and the world returned to night. The pilot car led them back under the stars, onto the main line of highway. Cones ended in a tidy stack. The last sign stood upright without a track beneath it. End road work. The white car rolled another 100 feet, slowed, and the message on its tail changed once more. "Thank you," it said, all caps, perfectly centered. Elena could see the driver now as a shape in the headrest, a sort of presence more than a person. She lifted a hand, a gesture no one needed to witness. The pilot car eased forward, took the next turnout, and was gone. The CB found itself again voices about weather, about coffee. She waited for one of them to mention closures. None did. On the descending grade, the highway widened and held its breath like something finished. She let the engine brake do the poetry, a measured rumble that tamed gravity. At the valley floor, she took a break in a well-lit lot with a view of snow on distant fields. She stretched, breathed the chalky cold, and looked at the front of her truck out of habit. There on the lower edge of the bumper, a sticker had been adhered with care. It was small, white block letters on black, "Thank you for 25. It was clean, unwrinkled. She hadn't seen it before. Inside the building, a clerk with silver hair and a smile that had done hard work for a long time made small talk while counting change. Elena mentioned construction on the pass. "Construction?" the clerk said, voice gentle. "Not this year. Not since they finished the new span. We had that slide 4 winters back. Took out a chunk of the old road. They ran pilot cars up there for months while they cut and anchored and prayed for dry weather. Long nights. 4 winters?" Elena repeated. The clerk nodded. You could hear the generators in town when the wind was right. A softness came to the eyes, the kind one gets when a memory is both treasured and difficult. They kept their speed strict. Anyone who came through too hot got the finger wag and the look. Nobody argued with those folks. They watched over a lot of drivers. Elena didn't press. The cup she bought steamed like an idea. She returned to her rig and sat for a moment before starting it. The sticker on her bumper tugged at the corner of her mind, like a polite dog. She left it there. On the return trip 3 days later, after delivering in a coastal city that smelled like salt and rain, she climbed the pass at dusk. The forecast now promised clear skies. The sunset behind her painted the peaks with peach and gold that turned to iron as she rose. She watched the turnouts, expecting, not expecting. At the same crest, there were no signs, no cones, no white car. She slowed anyway. 25 felt respectful, like taking off your hat in a church one doesn't belong to. As she reached the bend where the truss bridge lay on the old route, a wind came through the firs with the weight of a story and then was still. In her mirror, far back, a small amber sweep turned once. She did not turn to chase it with her eyes. She let it be what it was, a nod from the kind of place that doesn't hinge on being noticed. After that night, other drivers shared small pieces when the road got quiet. A man with a careful voice said he'd followed a pilot car through fog so dense he might as well have been underwater. Never saw the driver, he said, as if that were the least interesting part. Felt like my hands knew what to do without me. Got me through. Another said he'd seen cones that had no footprints near them, just sitting like chess pieces placed by the mountain itself. Felt crazy saying it, he added, then laughed and carefully didn't say it again. Months later, late spring, snow gone like a rumor, Elena stopped at a little turnout above the gorge where the old byway stood. She walked to the fence that asked politely for people not to be brave. On the far side, she could see the skeleton of the truss through the trees, no longer part of anything official. It wore its ribbons as always, silent declarations tied by hands she would never meet. She listened. Birds made their forward-looking comments. The river below talked to itself. The highway above breathed. She returned to the cab and saw, tucked just inside the glove box door, something she didn't remember tucking there. A folded triangle of white fabric, the kind used as a bandana by someone who worked outdoors. On one corner, in block letters from a permanent marker, someone had written, "Slow is safe." It smelled faintly of pine. She didn't call anyone to ask how that could be. She didn't ask if anyone had borrowed the truck. No one had. She put the cloth back where she found it and closed the door quietly, as if letting a sleeping thing stay asleep. Sometimes, nights stack the way pallets stack aligned, squared, strapped. Sometimes they misalign a half inch and remind a person that wait is a conversation, not a command. That winter, on a few more passes, when fog brushed glass and the white line softened, the mountain offered a gentle escort. The old work lamps glowed without cords. A voice, the tone of tired kindness, drifted in and out of the CB. "Work zone speed 25. Thank you for slowing." No one answered. No one needed to. Years later, coming off a long run as the first flakes returned to the high road, Elena noticed truck stop t-shirts in a corner rack printed with slogans that only drivers found funny. Between them, folded almost shyly, there was one in black, with small white writing, "Thank you for 25. She bought it without making a show of it, and when asked if she wanted a receipt, she shook her head. She drove the pass as the first hour of morning approached, the sky beginning to think about color. The crest came, the air sharpened, and the old byway bent away into trees. Nothing unusual moved. She kept her pace, even, measured, respectful of an absence that felt less like emptiness and more like a presence disguised as ordinary. The amber lights didn't appear. The lamps didn't light. Yet the feeling in the cab settled like a blanket set out in the sun and brought inside warm. She had followed a pilot car in the dark once, and it had led her true. She had seen a sign she hadn't expected. Thank her without once asking anything in return. That was enough. The mountain did what mountains do, stood, held, waited. The road did what roads do, gave and gave and gave. And somewhere, in the column of air between the truss and the firs, a low, thoughtful voice kept a line open for anyone who needed it. Story number 7. Lydia kept an atlas she didn't need. The dash already held a GPS that spoke in a neat voice, quicker on turns than most dispatchers. But the atlas, a thick, spiral-bound book with pages softened by hands, felt like company. She'd bought it from a bin between the coffee station and the postcard rack at a small-town fuel stop, the kind of place with a cat curled behind a stack of windshield washer fluid. On the inside cover, in faded ink, someone had written a name and a simple phrase, R. Hollis. This book knows the way. That night, the planes were an open room. Wind towers turned slowly, their red beacons blinking in polite sequence. Her trailer carried paper huge rolls that would be sliced into grocery bags by morning, quiet and heavy. the cargo equivalent of a sleeping dog. Frost had traced the edges of the grass, and fences drew straight lines through nothing. Her radio stayed low. The GPS map showed a river like a blue ribbon she would meet after midnight, then cross on a bridge she'd never noticed in daylight. She set the atlas on the passenger seat out of habit. It made a sound when it landed, not quite a thump, more like a chalkboard eraser being set down. She smiled at the thought. She had learned to drive from a father who trusted paper. The book was a nod to him, and to a certain way of being awake. The first note had been there when she bought it, a pencil line next to a curve in the interstate near the county fairgrounds. Watch for horses on shooter during August. It made her laugh in December. She folded to the state she was in and traced her route with her finger. A slow arc north and then east along the old river towns. On the margin, close to where she would cross the water, a new faint line seemed to sit where none had been earlier. She leaned closer. The pencil was barely there, like the memory of a word erased before it finished being written. Right lane, sunken lip at joint. Use left. She ran a fingertip over the paper. The graphite did not smudge. She glanced at the GPS. Its clean lines told her nothing about lips or joints. She glanced back at the atlas. The note was still there. She told herself she was tired, and the brain enjoyed games. She let the thought pass and drove. The river rose as a dark slice, the banks sharper where ice had formed and then broken. The bridge, when it arrived, had the look of a thing built by practical people. Concrete and guardrail, not a flourish anywhere. A sign announced its name, which the locals had probably ignored for years. She drifted to the left lane out of courtesy for an on-ramp merging on. As her front wheels met the first seam, the whole truck gave a small, polite nod. In the right lane, a joint looked an inch lower, a dark line that could have caught a heavy tire. She breathed in, slow, and let the truck do its music. On the far side, a sedan in the right lane hit the lower seam and bounced. No harm, just a ripple. She exhaled. The atlas sat quiet. She kept going. At the next rest area, she stopped to stretch. The night smelled like cold coffee poured out on gravel. The map lay open, catching blue from the dome light. She found a mechanical pencil in the cup holder and, half amused at herself, wrote near the margin where the warning had been, "Thank you." When she clicked the lead back and set the pencil down, she heard it the faintest rasp, not from the cab, not from the engine cooling, but from paper. The line appeared below her words, the graphite barely darker than a shadow. Welcome. The letters were careful and square, like someone practicing neatness. A draft could have moved dust and she might have called it that. She waited, holding very still to hear whether the sound would return. It didn't. A semi rolled in 3 spaces over, lights sweeping across bare trees. She closed the book gently and returned to the road. An hour later, the GPS warned of a slowdown and then took it back as if it had changed its mind. The CB produced a few casual sentences about elk near a town she'd already passed, and a reminder that the storefront bakery in the next county made cinnamon rolls large enough to regret. The world had settled into its breaths. The pencil appeared again, this time without ceremony, as if it had been there all along. On the atlas page for the next stretch, a neat arrow pointed to a narrow overpass. The margin next to it read, "Count 3 rumble strips. Take 4th lane change." She frowned in the ordinary way a person frowns at a Sudoku hint. "All right," she said to no one. The overpass rose. A ribbon of concrete with short guardrails. Rumble strips began before it. She counted with the careful concentration one uses when pouring oil. 1, 2, 3. At the 4th, she eased left. In the right lane, where she would have been, a rectangle of dark lay across the shoulder, the loose end of a strap, thick and flat, waiting to lasso a tire. The car in front of her straddled it and sent it twitching harmlessly. She passed it, heart steady, and told her left hand to stop squeezing quite so hard. She drove another 20 miles and then wrote, because at that point not writing felt rude, "Who are you?" The reply waited until the next turn of the page. Borrowed hand, it wrote. Watch mile 139. Fog pocket. Middle of the left. She let the line of cold settle along the back of her neck like a careful ribbon. the fog pocket appeared exactly where the word said it would. A low gray bowl the shape of a breath you could see. In the left lane, the center of the fog held deeper night, an oddity she wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't been told. She kept a gentle line away from it. The truck moved clean. Behind her, a pickup dipped to pass and then slowed, as if reconsidering life. The fog thinned 3 seconds later. She drove on. After midnight, the road turned starkly quiet. Even the towers seemed to blink slower. She passed a cluster of small houses with square yards and a tree in each, their windows lit like cookies on a tray. Somewhere, a TV laugh track made a modest try at being cheerful. The Atlas held its silence until the lights dissolved into field again. Then, firmly, like a teacher pointing at the board, came the next line. Stop at the next wayside. Leave at 2:18. Not before. She checked the clock. 1:59. The next sign announced a wayside with a restroom and a faded viewpoint. She had enough fuel. She had no reason to stop. She stopped anyway, in a slot that had a view of the little evergreen planted years ago by a scout troop. The truck settled and ticked as heat traded places with air. She sat with both hands around her coffee mug and heard, in the distance, the long line of a train. She waited. At 2:08, a county cruiser glided down the ramp and parked, lights off. The officer sat, facing the highway as if listening to it. At 2:14, another rig pulled in hot, brakes sniffing. It idled hard, then powered back up and left immediately, as if the seat had needle pricks. At 2:16, a spill of wind pushed against the side of her trailer and then moved on. At 2:18, she put the truck in gear and rolled down the ramp, just as an enormous tumbleweed the size of a chair bounced across the right lane ahead and whisked away like a startled animal. It would have caught under her bumper in a way that was more hassle than harm. But the feeling of leaving when asked, and the world cooperating, did something to her. It made her feel watched in the kindest way. The land changed to a patchwork of fields. A water tower rose with a town's name on it in a font that had been fashionable when payphones still stood like thin blue sentries. As she approached the exit for that town, the Atlas wrote, "Lanterns fill, will look open. It is not. Do not turn. Do not pull across the white paint." She remembered the name from a driver's joke about old signs that never died. She was not low on fuel. She did not need anything. Still, curiosity ran near the edge of her attention, like a stream by a road. She watched the exit appear. The sign hung straight. The letters glowed calm. The canopy lights looked steady, the kind of steady surplus that makes a person feel they can walk safely from door to vehicle. A small, hand-lettered poster board by the curb announced ice 99 cents in marker that hadn't bled in the rain. A soda machine blinked its red digital numbers like a friendly metronome. She stayed where she was, rolling past like a person who knows better than to make more plans at this hour. As she cleared the off-ramp, a strange sensation touched her, like standing in a doorway and feeling a room behind that isn't there. No sound came from the station. No generator hum, no bit of radio, no door chime. The glass of the storefront reflected only her passing truck, and not quite correctly. The stripe on her trailer along the lower edge gleamed in the fogged reflection as if it sat an inch too high. The Atlas's page was cool under her right hand, waiting in the way a cat waits, certain of having been obeyed. She drove 10 minutes in silence, then wrote in little letters at the bottom of a county page. What were they selling? The reply took its time. When it came, the graphite felt a little heavier. Light, it wrote. To anyone who wanted to be seen. She did not ask more. Near a silo that had been painted with a mural of a heron, the book wrote again, Exit 92, merge fast, far, right lane, ends early. No sign. Heating was easy. Her mirrors showed a car coming up quick on the right, where the lane did not in fact exist for as long as it used to. She made a clean gap, and the car slid behind her like a fish changing water. A tap of lights thanked her. She liked that part of the night, the choreography of courtesy. She began to pay attention not just to the notes, but to their voice. Each line felt like someone speaking without needing to be believed. There was never a command, always a suggestion with shape. Between them, fragments appeared that weren't instructions at all. A careful weather forecast that matched the sky. The name of a diner whose pie kept a rumor. The words, first snow here, in a town that had not yet built its salt shed for the year. Some notes seemed to be to someone else entirely. "Good turn," one said near a switchback on a road she wouldn't take. "Missed you at the scale," said another beside a way station that was closed tonight and had likely been closed for a season. When the long, straight stretches returned, Lydia decided to stop asking who. She asked instead how far this conversation was willing to go. It went to an address. The delivery was set for dawn east of the river near a low building where forklifts sang their morning songs. The atlas added, without flourish, "Take Dock 3, knock twice. If they send you to 5, wait until they call you back." She is new. It wasn't the kind of detail a map could have, but by then she had let go of what maps could and could not do. She arrived in the blue hour, when the world becomes careful with its colors. The plaques by the office door named shift leads who had seen winters. A young woman with earnest eyes checked the paper and pointed at Dock 5. Lydia smiled and put the truck where she was told. 15 minutes later, the same woman jogged out, apologetic, waving an arm. "My bad 3. "The system jumped," she said, cheeks pink from the cold. Lydia pulled around, slow and graceful, to where the building had been ready all along. While pallets moved and labels found their friends, she brought the atlas inside to a vinyl chair by a window that showed a parking lot turning silver. She turned to the inside cover again and ran a thumb over the name. R. Hollis. This book knows the way. Below that, Ghost Faint, was another scrawl, as if addressed to the person whose name began with R. Thanks for last fall. Saved me from riding the fog line all night. A.W. The book had been passed like a quiet tool, across a counter perhaps, or left on a table where someone who needed it would sit. She thought of setting it back in the truck and keeping it there forever. Instead, she wrote very small at the bottom of the inside cover where there was room. L. Summers. Thank you for the straps, and the fog, and the patience. I owe a favor. The return run took her south along a different river, under an overpass where swallows nested in good weather. Sun came up flat and pale, and then warmed. She let the GPS handle the math and let the atlas keep its quiet counsel. Mid-morning, when the road looked as ordinary as a hallway, the book made one more request. At 11:03, you will see a driver on the shoulder before the county line sign. Do not stop. Pass smooth. Wave once. It read like folklore. It read like mercy. She adjusted speed a little and was on time without trying. The shoulder ahead held a sedan with a hood up, a triangle placed properly, a man on a phone holding it high as if that helped the signal stand taller. He looked ordinary in the way that all stranded people look like someone you might know. She shifted lanes, gave him room, kept her line smooth. As she passed, she raised her hand once, palm out, not quite in the window. He raised his a second too late to meet hers. In her mirror, the car and the triangle slid away, small, then smaller, then part of a view. At the county line sign, a gust carried a sheet of paper across both lanes that had probably belonged under someone's wiper. It stuck to her bumper and then fluttered off. A mile later, the atlas said, soft as pencil allows. Good choice. Some things ask only for a wave. That evening, in a diner that had kept its counter stools even through renovations, Lydia sat with a bowl of chili and listened to a pair of drivers compare a slice of road one state over. When it felt like the right time, she asked if anyone had ever heard of R. Hollis. One of them, older, with hands that looked permanently washed in Diesel's idea of clean, lifted his fork like a conductor starting a piece. Her name was Ruth, he said. Ruth Hollis. Kept notebooks like you wouldn't believe. Atlas too. Wrote down which bridges sang and which ones didn't. People said she could tell you where fog would sit on an empty road. Ain't a ghost story. Just a good driver with a good memory. She stopped driving a while back. He smiled into the middle distance. I hope she's somewhere with a porch and birds. Lydia nodded. In the pocket of her jacket, the edge of the atlas brushed her hand like cloth. She paid, left a neat tip, and walked into the evening that smelled like wind and fried onions cooling. She thought for a moment, to keep the atlas forever, to be greedy with it. The thought passed. She finished her route, and before dawn the next day, pulled into a fuel stop with a shelf labeled, Take One, Leave One near the door, a library for paperbacks and worn-out maps. She placed the atlas on the shelf, spine out. It sat there quietly among thrillers with dog-eared corners and a cookbook from a church in a county she'd never see. On impulse, she took the mechanical pencil and tucked it into the spiral as if to pin a note. Then she turned to go. At the door, she stopped. A voice came from behind her, someone just inside the aisle, gentle, appreciative. "You just made someone's night." She turned. No one stood close by. A woman near the coolers was arguing with a cap stuck on a bottle. A teenager refilled the napkin dispensers. The atlas sat on the shelf as if it had been there since Tuesday. She smiled without quite saying why, and went back to the road. That night, on a different route with a different load, Lydia felt her hand go out to the passenger seat and touch empty air where the atlas had Saturday. She kept her eyes on the world outside the windshield. The GPS turned the next exit into a tidy arc on screen. A hawk on a fence post watched the land as if it belonged to it. The radio offered an old song about trains. Somewhere out there, a driver she didn't know would open the atlas and find tiny pencil warnings about fog and straps and the way light can be both a promise and a trick. And somewhere beyond there, when the land grew very quiet and the mile markers breathed their steady rhythm, a neat hand might find its way back to the page to write one more line for whoever had not yet learned to ask. Take the clean curve. Keep your wheels true. Someone is thinking about you getting home. And now the night grows quiet. The last story fades, and the hum of the highway softens into silence. These 7 tales drift like distant echoes, reminders of what waits beyond the glow of the dashboard light. Out here, even the dark seems to listen. Thank you for staying until the end. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what lingers on the road ahead. And like our video. Your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the highway. Now, let the stillness take over, breathe deep, and drift into sleep. Good night.